Is your brain exhausted from admitting you were wrong? Tired of confronting uncomfortable facts? Did you ignore 12 red flags, buy something you absolutely did not need, stay in a terrible relationship, and then somehow convince yourself? Actually, this was a very mature decision. Introducing the Brain Excuse Department, the revolutionary psychological service that helps your brain avoid responsibility with confidence. For only $19.99, our highly unqualified specialists will provide you with professionally manufactured excuses, such as, "I'm not avoiding intimacy, I'm independent. I didn't waste $300, I saved 40%. I'm not stalking their Instagram, I'm gathering information. I didn't lose the argument, they simply failed to understand how correct I was." And our best-selling classic, "I can fix them." No. No, you cannot. But with the Brain Excuse Department, reality never has to interfere with a perfectly good delusion. Every package includes one industrial-strength bottle of cognitive dissonance remover, 3 emergency packets of attachment issue seasoning, a deluxe loss aversion calculator that automatically tells you to keep every bad decision for another 6 months, and our exclusive social identity starter kit, guaranteed to transform any harmless preference into a bitter tribal conflict by lunchtime. Choose Pepsi? Congratulations, Coke drinkers are now your sworn enemies. Own an iPhone? Wonderful. You are apparently qualified to judge the moral character of Android users. And for an additional $4.99, we will send you the Little Voice Inside Your Head Premium Upgrade, featuring phrases like, "Text them again," "Buy it," "Everybody else is wrong," and "This definitely counts as self-care." Warning. The Brain Excuse Department cannot treat actual psychological conditions, provide therapy, repair your dating history, recover money spent during emotional online shopping, or explain why you keep returning to the same person after announcing 17 times that you are done for real this time. Possible side effects include self-awareness, embarrassment, personal growth, and suddenly realizing your mother was right about that guy. The Brain Excuse Department, because sometimes your brain does not need facts, it needs a damn alibi.
Disclaimer. This documentary is presented for educational, historical, psychological, analytical, and entertainment purposes only. We are discussing psychological theories, research, experiments, and patterns of human behavior. We are not diagnosing you, your ex, your mother-in-law, the guy who left you on red for 6 hours, or that one person in the group chat everybody quietly knows is a problem. Attachment styles, cognitive dissonance, loss aversion, learned helplessness, trauma responses, and every other psychological concept discussed here are complicated subjects. Human beings are not vending machines where you press button A and receive personality disorder B. Some of the studies discussed in this documentary were conducted decades ago under ethical standards that would make a modern research board choke on its coffee. They are included because they influence the history of psychology, not because the Pizzaverse recommends recreating them in your basement. And please remember, hearing 3 symptoms on YouTube does not make you a licensed psychologist. If halfway through this documentary you suddenly decide that everybody you have ever dated is avoidant, your boss has cognitive dissonance, your cousin is experiencing terror management theory, and your entire family needs therapy, congratulations. You have discovered the most dangerous psychological condition of all. Watching one documentary and becoming Dr. Freud. Actual mental health concerns should be discussed with a qualified professional. The Pizzaverse diagnoses exactly one condition. Human beings are weird as hell. And fortunately for us, psychology has receipts.
Why your brain keeps lying to you. 12 psychology theories that explain more than you want them to. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent Vinny DiPrio. Produced by Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions. Your brain is lying to you. Not constantly. Just often enough to make things interesting. You think you picked that relationship because the chemistry was incredible. Maybe. Or maybe your attachment system recognized something painfully familiar and said, "Yeah, this disaster feels like home." You think you kept that expensive jacket because it was worth the money. Sure. Or maybe admitting you wasted $200 would have caused your ego to file an emergency appeal. You think you hate the other team because you carefully studied the evidence and reached a rational conclusion. Of course you did. And by a completely astonishing coincidence, your side just happens to be smarter, better looking, morally superior, and apparently blessed by God himself. Psychology has spent more than a century studying the strange machinery underneath human behavior. Why we repeat patterns we know are bad for us. Why we defend decisions long after the evidence has turned against them. Why losing something hurts more than gaining something feels good. Why we copy people without realizing it. Why fear can masquerade as attraction. Why repeated failure can teach someone to stop trying. Why humans can turn practically anything into an us versus them argument. Android versus iPhone. Yankees versus Red Sox. New York pizza versus whatever the hell somebody in Ohio decided to call pizza. Civilization hangs by a thread. And underneath all of it is a brain doing exactly what evolution, experience, conditioning, relationships, culture, and a lifetime of questionable decisions trained it to do. Today, we are breaking down 12 psychological theories that explain some of the strangest parts of being human. Attachment theory, cognitive dissonance, loss aversion, social learning, the two-factor theory of emotion, learned helplessness, social identity, self-determination, terror management theory, post-traumatic growth, flow, and behaviorism. Some of these theories will explain people you know. Some of them will explain people you dated. And somewhere around number 6, there is a decent chance one of them is going to explain you. Which is where things get uncomfortable. Because understanding psychology is easy when we are analyzing everybody else. The real fun begins when the evidence turns around, pulls up a chair, and says, "Okay, sweetheart, now let's talk about you." Welcome to the Pizzaverse, where we don't rewrite psychology. We explain it. Number 12, attachment theory. Have you ever noticed that you keep falling for the same type of person? Different face, different name, same exact energy that will eventually destroy your sleep schedule. You tell yourself it is just a coincidence. Spoiler, it is probably not just a coincidence. Sometimes it is a pattern your brain started building when you were very young, and you may have been running parts of it on autopilot ever since. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded through the work of Mary Ainsworth and others, proposes that early relationships with caregivers help shape expectations about safety, trust, closeness, and relationships. But attachment is not determined entirely by childhood, and attachment styles are not permanent personality diagnoses. If caregivers respond consistently enough, you cry, someone comes. You are scared, someone helps calm you down. Over time, the developing brain can learn that relationships are generally safe and that other people can often be trusted. That is associated with secure attachment. People with more secure attachment patterns tend to find intimacy, trust, and emotional regulation somewhat easier. Not perfect, just generally less likely to turn every Tuesday afternoon into a walking soap opera. But when caregiving is inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, frightening, or unpredictable, children may develop insecure patterns of attachment. In popular discussions of adult attachment, these are often described as anxious, avoidant, and fearful or disorganized patterns. First, anxious attachment. This is the person who sends a message, gets no reply for 1 hour, and has already mentally rehearsed 3 different breakup scenarios. They may constantly seek reassurance and fear abandonment. The irony is that an intense need for reassurance can sometimes strain relationships, which may reinforce the original fear. It becomes one hell of a cycle. Second, avoidant attachment. The closer someone gets, the more this person may want to vanish. They are the ones saying, "I just need space," or "I'm not really built for relationships." Not necessarily because they feel nothing, but because depending on other people or expressing vulnerability may have become associated with discomfort, rejection, or disappointment. So the strategy becomes stay distant, stay safe. And this is where your brain can start lying to you, convincing you that pushing everyone away is independence, when sometimes it is old armor that never came off. Put an anxiously attached person and an avoidantly attached person together, and you can get the classic chase and retreat cycle. One person reaches harder, the other retreats farther. Then the retreat makes the first person chase even harder. Both people can end up completely exhausted. That does not mean they are incapable of loving each other or that the relationship is automatically doomed. It means their attachment strategies can keep triggering each other. Third, fearful or disorganized attachment. In developmental attachment research, disorganized attachment has been associated with situations in which the caregiver may become both a source of comfort and a source of fear. The child needs closeness while simultaneously being frightened or confused by it. That contradiction can later resemble relationships that run hot and cold, where someone desperately wants connection but becomes frightened when genuine intimacy appears. The good news is that attachment patterns are not carved into concrete. Supportive relationships, increased self-awareness, and therapy can help people develop greater attachment security over time. But you cannot work on a pattern you have never bothered to look at. Number 11, cognitive dissonance. You spent 3 years in a relationship with obvious red flags the size of highway billboards. Everyone around you saw it. You saw it too, technically. But every time someone brought it up, you had a perfectly reasonable explanation ready. They're just going through a hard time. Nobody is perfect. We've been through so much together. The human brain is an extraordinary machine, and one of its more impressive talents is constructing explanations that allow its owner to keep functioning without admitting something deeply uncomfortable. Leon Festinger formally introduced the theory of cognitive dissonance in 1957. The basic idea is simple. When your beliefs, attitudes, and actions contradict one another, that inconsistency can create psychological discomfort. People then try to reduce that discomfort. Sometimes they change their behavior. Sometimes they change their beliefs. And sometimes they perform Olympic-level mental gymnastics until the contradiction somehow looks reasonable. Festinger and colleagues famously studied a doomsday group whose prophecy failed. When the predicted catastrophe did not occur, some highly committed members did not simply abandon the belief. Instead, they reinterpreted the failure in a way that protected the original worldview. That work helped illustrate how commitment can sometimes intensify rationalization when reality refuses to cooperate. Festinger later conducted another classic experiment with James Carl Smith. Participants performed extremely boring tasks and were then asked to tell another person that the tasks were enjoyable. Some were paid $20. Others were paid only $1. The people paid only $1 later rated the task as more enjoyable than those paid $20. Why? $20 gave people a clear external reason for saying something they did not believe. $1 did not. So for some participants, the easier psychological resolution was essentially, I would not say that for almost nothing unless maybe I actually liked the task more than I thought. Self-deception assembled while you wait. You see versions of this everywhere. The overpriced jacket that was honestly just okay. But you keep telling everybody it is amazing because you paid too much to admit otherwise. The degree you spent 4 years earning and did not enjoy. But you have constructed a very convincing argument for why everything is definitely going according to plan. The relationship where you have invested so much time and emotion that leaving feels like admitting the entire thing was a mistake. And that is where this really gets people. The investment is not merely emotional. It becomes part of identity. Admitting that a choice was wrong can feel dangerously close to admitting something about the person who made the choice. And that is a much harder pill to swallow. Number 10, prospect theory and loss aversion. You are scrolling through an online store and see a jacket at full price. You scroll right past it. Then you see the same jacket again. Old price crossed out. New price highlighted in red. Suddenly it feels like an opportunity. Suddenly, not buying the jacket somehow feels like losing money. You were not even looking for a jacket. Yet here you are entering your card details. Welcome to prospect theory. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky developed prospect theory to explain how people actually make decisions involving risk and uncertainty, rather than how a perfectly rational decision-maker supposedly should behave. Their landmark prospect theory paper appeared in 1979. One of the most famous ideas associated with this research is loss aversion. Losses generally loom larger psychologically than equivalent gains. If you lose $100, the emotional impact is usually stronger than the pleasure of unexpectedly gaining $100. The amounts are identical. The experience is not. Anyone who has ever held on to a losing investment knows the feeling. You refuse to sell because selling makes the loss feel final. As long as you have not pressed the button, there is still hope. Loss aversion and related biases can contribute to people holding losing investments longer than they otherwise might. The same broad principles show up in pricing. A crossed-out price creates a reference point. Now you are no longer evaluating the jacket simply as a jacket costing $80. You are comparing $80 with the supposed $140 you could have paid. The transaction starts feeling less like spending $80 and more like saving $60. Marketing departments everywhere just smiled. Casino chips can create a similar psychological separation between the player and actual cash. Although gambling behavior involves far more than one cognitive mechanism. A colorful chip does not always feel exactly like the $20 bill it represents. Same monetary value. Different psychological packaging. Loss aversion may even help explain part of why people resist ending relationships, careers, or projects they no longer want. You are not only thinking about what comes next, you are thinking about everything you are about to lose. The routine, the shared history, the familiar environment, the years already invested. That anticipated loss can make staying feel psychologically easier than leaving, even when staying is no longer making you happy. The brain sometimes prefers the devil it already paid for. Number 9. Social learning theory. Nobody sat you down and explained why certain phone brands are supposedly cooler than others. Nobody gave you a formal class on exactly how to dress if you want to look like you have your life together. And yet somehow, you absorbed it. You watched people. You noticed what received approval. Your brain quietly filed the information away. Albert Bandura's work on observational learning showed just how powerful that process can be. His famous Bobo doll experiments demonstrated that children who watched adults behave aggressively toward an inflatable doll were more likely to imitate aggressive behaviors afterward. Nobody needed to give them a 12-page instruction manual titled How to Beat Up an Inflatable Clown. They watched. They learned. That is the central idea behind observational learning. A great deal of human behavior can be acquired not only through direct reward and punishment, but by watching other people and observing what happens to them. You watch somebody you admire. They do something. It appears to work. Your brain pays attention. This is one psychological mechanism that helps explain the power of influencers, celebrities, peers, parents, teachers, and social groups. The brain does not always require a detailed argument. Sometimes seeing somebody you identify with doing something is enough to make the behavior more attractive. Bandura also developed the concept of self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to successfully perform a particular task. And self-efficacy matters because believing that you can handle something influences whether you begin, how much effort you invest, how long you persist, and how you respond when things go sideways. The important caveat is that self-efficacy is not the same thing as blindly believing you are fantastic at everything. Confidence without competence is not self-efficacy. That is just delusion with better branding. Healthy self-efficacy is grounded in experience, learning, practice, and evidence. You have done the work. You have developed the ability, and you trust yourself to use it. The less comfortable version of all this is that you are being influenced by what you repeatedly consume. The people you watch, the behavior surrounding you, the norms inside your community, the content entering your head every day. All of it supplies information to the observational learning machinery running quietly in the background, which is worth thinking about, even if most people would rather not. Number 8. The two-factor theory of emotion. Here is a scenario that has happened to more people than would ever admit it. You go on a date. The date involves something with a slight edge. A horror movie. A rooftop with a view that makes your stomach drop. Maybe a theme park ride that briefly convinces you that your obituary is about to become somebody else's problem. And somewhere in the middle of all that adrenaline, you look at the other person and think, "Wow, I really like them." The racing heart. The shallow breathing. That electric feeling that this person might be special. Except here is where psychology gets interesting. Sometimes the brain has to interpret what physical arousal actually means. Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer proposed the two-factor theory of emotion in 1962. The theory argued that emotional experience can involve both physiological arousal and a cognitive interpretation of that arousal based on context. Their famous experiment used epinephrine to produce physical arousal while manipulating the social situation participants experienced. The study became hugely influential, although later researchers have debated aspects of the original findings, and the simple textbook version is cleaner than the actual evidence. The larger idea inspired decades of research into what became known as misattribution of arousal. One particularly famous demonstration came from Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron in 1974. Male participants were approached after crossing either a frightening suspension bridge or a much safer bridge by an attractive female interviewer. Men in the high arousal bridge condition were more likely to contact the interviewer afterward, and their responses also contained more sexual imagery. The researchers interpreted the findings as evidence that physiological arousal caused by fear could sometimes become associated with attraction. So taking somebody to a horror movie on a first date might accidentally give Cupid a jump scare. That does not mean you can manufacture love by putting somebody on a roller coaster. Calm down, Dr. Frankenstein. But context can influence how people interpret what their bodies are doing. This does not mean every feeling you have ever experienced is fake. It means emotional experience is sometimes more constructed and context-dependent than it feels from the inside. Your body reacts. Your brain tries to explain why. And your brain is extremely good at telling convincing stories. Number 7. Learned helplessness. Imagine you try something. It fails. You try again. It fails again. You adjust. You push harder. You try another approach. Nothing changes. After enough experiences where your actions seem to have no effect on the outcome, something can shift. Eventually, you stop trying. The original concept of learned helplessness emerged from experiments by Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer in the 1960s. In their early work, dogs exposed to uncontrollable electric shocks later often failed to escape from shocks even when escape became possible. The experiments were deeply unpleasant by modern standards. In the later Shuttlebox tests, dogs with prior experience controlling shocks learned to escape, while many dogs previously exposed to uncontrollable shocks did not. Seligman and Mayer originally interpreted this as the animals learning that their behavior had no effect. Later neuroscience complicated that explanation. Mayer and Seligman eventually argued that passivity in response to prolonged uncontrollable stress may be closer to a default defensive response, while experiences of control teach the brain that action can change outcomes. That update matters. Psychology, contrary to what the internet sometimes believes, is allowed to revise itself when new evidence shows up. The basic lesson still maps onto human behavior. Repeated experiences of having little or no control can produce passivity and make future action harder, even after circumstances improve. A door can open, and a person who has repeatedly learned that doors never open may stop checking. Ideas related to helplessness have also been used as one possible lens for understanding social disengagement, burnout, and withdrawal. But we should be careful about turning an entire generation, culture, or movement into a psychological diagnosis. Sometimes people disengage because they are exhausted. Sometimes because incentives really are terrible. Sometimes because the system genuinely is not rewarding effort. And sometimes several things are happening at once. Seligman later became one of the central figures in positive psychology and wrote extensively about learned optimism and resilience. The hopeful part is simple. Expectations can change. People who have repeatedly experienced lack of control can regain a sense of agency when they begin experiencing situations in which their actions reliably matter. The exit may be there. Sometimes the nervous system needs evidence before it believes you. Number 6. Social identity theory. Henri Tajfel had one of the more harrowing personal histories behind a major psychological theory. Tajfel was a Polish Jew who served in the French army during World War II and became a prisoner of war. He survived while concealing his Jewish identity and later discovered that many members of his family and community had been murdered. His later career became deeply concerned with prejudice, group identity, and the question of how easily human beings divide themselves into us and them. Tajfel and his colleagues developed what became known as the minimal group paradigm. Participants who were strangers were divided into essentially meaningless groups, sometimes using trivial distinctions such as supposed preferences for different painters. Then they were asked to allocate points or rewards between anonymous members identified only by group membership. The result was striking. Even when the categories themselves meant almost nothing, participants often favored members of their own group. Some allocation patterns even favored maximizing the difference between the groups, rather than maximizing the absolute reward received by everyone. That became part of the foundation for social identity theory, later developed by Tajfel and John Turner. The uncomfortable implication is that humans do not always need a centuries-old blood feud to start displaying in group favoritism. Sometimes a label is enough to get the machinery started. Once the brain accepts us and them, people can begin building stories around those categories. Our group is smarter. Our group gets it. Our group has better taste. Our group understands how the world works. This does not automatically mean hatred or discrimination will follow. But categorization gives the brain raw material for bias. And this is not limited to politics, nationality, religion, or historical atrocities. It shows up in ridiculous places too. Phone brands, football teams, universities, neighborhoods, generations. Music genres. Somebody starts with, I use an iPhone. Then somehow, 6 arguments later, we are conducting anthropology on Android users in a YouTube comment section. Nothing changed except the strength of identification with the category. And this is where your brain starts lying to you. Because tribalism rarely feels like tribalism from the inside. It feels like objective observation. You just happen to be correct. And astonishingly, the group you already belong to just happens to be the superior one. What a coincidence. Except it probably is not. Number 5. Self-determination theory. There is a classic line of research that should make anybody who thinks motivation is simply pay people more and they will automatically love the work slightly uncomfortable. In early experiments on intrinsic motivation, Edward Deci had participants work on interesting puzzles. When participants were temporarily paid for solving them and the reward was later removed, they spent less of their free choice time continuing the puzzles than they had before payment was introduced. The finding helped inspire research into what became known as the overjustification or undermining effect, although later research showed that the relationship between rewards and motivation depends heavily on the type of reward, how it is delivered, and how controlling it feels. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan later developed self-determination theory, which distinguishes different forms of motivation and emphasizes 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. First, autonomy. The sense that you have meaningful choice and ownership over what you are doing. Second, competence. The feeling that you are capable, improving, and able to meet meaningful challenges. Third, relatedness. The feeling that you are genuinely connected to other people. When those needs are supported, intrinsic motivation and well-being tend to be stronger. When they are constantly frustrated, motivation can start feeling hollow even when external rewards remain. And that brings us to one of the most misunderstood corporate legends in this entire script. Google famously encouraged versions of what became known as 20% time, allowing some employees to pursue side projects related to their interests. Some Google projects did begin this way. Google Transit, for example, was explicitly described by Google as having started as a 20% project. But Google Maps itself did not simply spring fully formed from somebody's 20% side project, so that claim gets tossed into the historical dumpster. The broader point survives. Giving people meaningful autonomy can sometimes create conditions where experimentation and innovation thrive. And the version of this that hits creators directly is passion projects. If you have ever loved a hobby and then watched it start feeling suspiciously like a job the second money, deadlines, analytics, sponsors, and expectations arrived, there is psychology underneath that change. Monetization does not automatically destroy passion. But external pressure can change the reason an activity feels worth doing. Nothing kills the mood quite like turning your happy little side project into a spreadsheet wearing handcuffs. Number 4. Terror management theory. Human beings possess an unusually elaborate ability to think about the future, including the unavoidable fact that our own lives will eventually end. And if you think about that for more than 30 seconds, congratulations. You have just ruined lunch. Terror management theory was developed in the 1980s by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski, building heavily on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker. The theory proposes that awareness of mortality can create existential anxiety, and that people manage this partly through cultural worldviews, self-esteem, relationships, meaning, and systems that make life feel significant. Religion, culture, legacy, national identity, family, art, political ideology, communities. These systems can provide the feeling that your life participates in something larger than your individual biological existence. Researchers studying what is called mortality salience have reported that reminders of death can sometimes increase defense of cultural worldviews, identification with valued groups, and other behaviors connected to self-esteem and meaning. But the research is not without controversy. Some mortality salience findings have proven difficult to replicate, and researchers continue debating exactly how strong and general these effects are. So we are not going to claim that every time somebody buys a Rolex, it is secretly because they remembered they are mortal. That would be psychology fan fiction. There is, however, research suggesting that mortality reminders can affect some consumer preferences, including status or luxury consumption under certain circumstances. Advertisers also routinely use scarcity and urgency. Once in a lifetime. Limited edition. Only 3 remaining. Act now. Not all of that is terror management theory. A lot of it is plain old scarcity marketing. But it is all poking at the uncomfortable knowledge that opportunities, possessions, experiences, and eventually time itself are finite. The Stoics had a considerably less annoying version of the same reality. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. Not because you are supposed to sit in the kitchen staring into the void. Because remembering that time is limited can clarify priorities. Start the business. Make the thing. Tell somebody what they mean to you. Stop donating 6 hours a week to arguments you will not remember 5 years from now. Everything ends, so nothing matters, is one conclusion. Everything ends, so choose carefully what matters, is another. Same fact. Completely different life. Number 3. Post-traumatic growth. When something genuinely terrible happens to a person, the aftermath is not predictable. Some people struggle for years. Some recover gradually. Some experience both distress and unexpected positive change at the same time. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun introduced the term post-traumatic growth to describe positive psychological changes that some people report as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. Their research identified areas including a greater appreciation of life, deeper relationships, recognition of personal strength, new possibilities, and spiritual or existential change. And the wording matters. Growth does not mean the trauma was good. The trauma was not secretly a motivational seminar wearing brass knuckles. Post-traumatic growth refers to changes that can emerge through the struggle with what happened. It does not mean somebody becomes thankful that they were traumatized. It does not mean everybody grows. It does not mean people who continue struggling somehow failed. And it does not mean distress disappears. Research on post-traumatic growth is real, but interpretation requires caution because reports of growth do not always mean every measurable area of functioning has objectively improved. A person can experience post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth at the same time. Human beings are annoyingly complicated that way. Tedeschi and Calhoun's work suggests that trauma can shatter assumptions about how the world works. That can force people into a long process of trying to rebuild meaning. Sometimes that process changes priorities. Relationships become more honest. Ordinary life becomes more valuable. People discover strengths they did not know they possessed. Others find entirely new directions. But none of that is guaranteed. And we should drop the line that a 60-year-old automatically has fewer recovery resources than a 25-year-old. Older adults can absolutely experience substantial post-traumatic growth, and age does not give us a simple universal formula for who will recover well. Not every piece of carbon becomes a diamond under pressure. Sometimes pressure just causes damage. Pretending otherwise is not inspirational. It is dismissive. For people who do report growth, the process often involves struggling with disrupted beliefs, reflecting on what happened, reconstructing meaning, and eventually integrating the experience into a changed understanding of life. Recognizing the possibility of growth does not require pretending the pain was worth it. Both things can exist at once. Number 2, flow state. There was a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And yes, that name has defeated more narrators than some entire paragraphs. Csikszentmihalyi spent much of his career studying a deceptively simple question. When do people feel most deeply engaged with life? He and his colleagues used a method called experience sampling, where people were contacted at random times during daily life and asked to report what they were doing and how they felt. Before smartphones made everybody permanently reachable, this often involved electronic pagers. One influential study with Judith Lefebvre followed adult workers throughout everyday life and found that flow experiences occurred more frequently during work than during leisure, even though people often reported wishing they were doing something else. That became known as part of the paradox of work. People fantasize about doing absolutely nothing. Then when they finally do absolutely nothing, their brain sometimes gets bored in 11 minutes and starts opening apps. Csikszentmihalyi called the deeply absorbed state flow. Flow tends to occur when the challenge of an activity is well matched to a person's skill, especially when goals are clear and feedback is available. Too easy and you get bored. Too difficult and you get overwhelmed. But when the challenge pushes you near the edge of your ability without completely burying you, attention can lock in. Self-consciousness may decrease. Time can feel distorted. Action and awareness begin to merge. You stop standing outside yourself, judging everything you are doing. For a while, there is just the activity. That might happen while writing, painting, editing, playing an instrument, solving a difficult problem, playing a sport, having an unusually deep conversation. And yes, video games can absolutely produce flow too. The brain does not inspect your hobby and say, "Excuse me, is this sufficiently sophisticated?" Flow is not completely programmable, but its conditions can be encouraged. Clear goals, immediate feedback, fewer interruptions. A challenge that actually requires your attention. Enough skill to make progress. Enough difficulty to prevent boredom. And this is where modern life occasionally shoots itself in the foot. Maximum comfort and endless passive stimulation do not automatically produce maximum satisfaction. Csikszentmihalyi's work suggests that some of the richest experiences happen when we voluntarily use our abilities at their limits. Not because the brain does not light up during rest. That original line was too broad and scientifically wrong. Rest matters. Recovery matters. Doing absolutely nothing occasionally is wonderful. But so is meaningful struggle. And a satisfying life probably needs room for both. Number 1, behaviorism and conditioning. Before we close, there is one approach that deserves its own moment because its fingerprints are all over modern psychology, education, advertising, therapy, and the way we think about learned behavior. Behaviorism. John B. Watson became one of the major founders of behaviorism in the early 20th century. In his famous 1913 Behaviorist Manifesto, Watson argued that psychology should focus on observable behavior and become an objective experimental science rather than relying heavily on introspection. Watson pushed environmental explanations extremely far. He became famous for claiming that, given a group of healthy infants and complete control over their environment, he could train any one of them to become nearly any kind of specialist, regardless of ancestry or natural tendencies. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, even beggar or thief. It was an audacious claim, and modern psychology absolutely does not accept the idea that human development is purely environmental. Genes, temperament, biology, development, culture, learning, and environment all interact. Human beings are not blank hard drives waiting for Dad to install Microsoft Personality. Watson's most infamous experiment was conducted with Rosalie Rayner. The subject became known as Little Albert. Albert was initially tested at around 9 months old. The famous fear conditioning procedure began when he was closer to 11 months old. Watson and Rayner repeatedly paired the appearance of a white rat with a sudden loud noise. Eventually, Albert began reacting fearfully to the rat itself. The researchers then reported fear responses to some other furry objects and stimuli, suggesting stimulus generalization. The study became one of psychology's best-known demonstrations of conditioning and one of its most notorious ethical disasters. By modern ethical standards, intentionally frightening an infant for an experiment is not exactly getting through the Institutional Review Board with a smiley face sticker. Watson and Rayner did not successfully decondition Albert before he left the study. And we should correct another popular version of the story. Albert's later identity and life are still historically disputed. Researchers have proposed different candidates, and we cannot confidently tell a dramatic story about exactly what became of him. Watson later left Johns Hopkins University in 1920 after his affair with Rosalie Rayner became a public scandal. He then entered advertising and eventually became a successful executive at the J. Walter Thompson Agency. And this is where the legend sometimes outruns the evidence. Watson did not invent every modern advertising technique. He did not invent emotional advertising. He did not invent celebrity endorsements. Marketers had been manipulating human attention perfectly well before Watson walked through the door. What he did help demonstrate was how psychological ideas about learning, emotion, repetition, association, and behavior could be deliberately applied to commercial advertising. That influence mattered. Associate a product with beauty. Status. Security. Romance. Success. Fear. Relief. Repeat the association enough times, and eventually the product can acquire emotional meaning that has very little to do with what the product physically does. That general principle remains central to advertising. Watson also promoted extremely strict child-rearing ideas that discouraged excessive affection. His family relationships later became troubled, but it would be irresponsible to claim that his psychological theory alone destroyed his children. Human lives are not controlled experiments. Near the end of his life, Watson also burned many of his letters and professional papers, depriving historians of material that could have clarified parts of his life and career. And maybe that is the perfect ending for Watson. The man who spent his career insisting that human behavior could be explained through observable evidence eventually destroyed some of the evidence historians needed to understand him. There is some irony sitting there wearing a three-piece suit. The larger lesson survives him. Your environment genuinely shapes you. Repeated experiences shape habits. Associations shape emotional reactions. Rewards and consequences influence behavior. People around you model what seems normal. Many automatic responses were learned long before you consciously understood what was happening. But Watson went too far when he treated environment as practically everything. Modern psychology paints a far messier picture. Biology matters. Temperament matters. Learning matters. Relationships matter. Culture matters. Experience matters. And knowing that conditioning exists does not make you immune to it. It just gives you slightly better odds of noticing when somebody is trying to push the buttons. And frankly, in a world built around algorithms, advertising, notifications, influencers, outrage bait, political tribalism, and somebody screaming "limited time only" every 17 seconds, noticing the buttons might be half the battle. And there you have it. 12 psychological theories explaining why human beings fall in love with the wrong people, defend terrible decisions, fear losing things they never needed, copy strangers on the internet, mistake adrenaline for romance, join imaginary tribes, and occasionally convince themselves that buying something at 40% off somehow made them money. The human brain is magnificent. It is also a shady little accountant with access to your memories. And maybe that is the real lesson here. Psychology does not tell us that every decision is fake or that free will does not exist. It shows us that beneath every conscious choice is an enormous collection of habits, expectations, emotions, memories, social influences, and learned responses quietly helping steer the wheel. Sometimes they help us. Sometimes they protect us. Sometimes they have us texting somebody at 2:17 in the morning who should have been blocked 6 months ago. Progress. The important part is recognizing the pattern. Because once you can see what your brain is doing, you have a better chance of deciding whether you actually want to keep doing it. Your attachment style is not destiny. Your past does not dictate every future choice. Your group identity does not automatically make the other side stupid. Your fear is not always intuition. And just because your brain produced a convincing explanation does not mean the little bastard is telling the truth. Stay curious. Question your assumptions. And every once in a while, investigate the investigator living between your ears. Because the human brain may be complicated, but psychology has receipts.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe to Bambi Palermo and the Pizzaverse for more documentaries exploring hidden history, organized crime, psychology, old Hollywood, dark fairy tales, strange legends, and the stories powerful people would prefer you never examine too closely. Here in the Pizzaverse, we dig past the headlines, kick the tires on the accepted story, and ask the questions everybody else conveniently forgot to ask. So hit subscribe, join the social club, and stick around. We got plenty more files sitting on the desk. And trust me, some of them are weird as hell. And before we go, thank you to everybody who watches, comments, shares the videos, supports the channel and keeps showing up, especially the real ones. You already know who you are. This little corner of the internet exists because you keep coming back, bringing the conversation, challenging the stories, laughing with us, and helping our empire keep growing. So from Bambi, Vinny, Pizzaverse Studios, and Palermo Productions, thank you to the real ones. Stay sharp. Stay skeptical. Stay authentic. We'll see you at the next one. Has this ever happened to you? You spend $48 on a beautiful birthday cake, 3 layers, custom frosting, candles perfectly placed. Everybody gathers around. You start singing happy birthday, and the damn cake gets up and runs. That's right. Every year, thousands of innocent birthday parties are ruined by cakes that suddenly decide they have goals, dreams, and apparently a cardio routine. Introducing Pizzaverse Runaway Birthday Cake Insurance. Because your cake should be dessert, not a fugitive. Our comprehensive birthday protection package covers runaway cakes, aggressive cupcakes, hostile canolas, emotionally unstable cheesecakes, and sheet cakes that suddenly announce, I need to find myself. For just $9.99 a month, our highly trained cake recovery unit will immediately respond to your birthday emergency. Our agents arrive equipped with 1 industrial strength cake net, 2 frosting resistant gloves, a sprinkle tracking system, and 1 Italian grandmother who simply points at the cake and says, sit down. 97% of cakes surrender immediately. And if your birthday cake manages to escape the property, don't worry. We activate the birthday cake Amber Alert. Every phone in the neighborhood receives the following message. Warning, 3-layer vanilla cake last seen heading east, possibly armed with sprinkles. But wait. Upgrade to our deluxe party protection package, and we'll also cover damage caused by flying balloons, exploding confetti cannons, droga piñatas, and relatives who show up 3 hours early asking when the food is ready. Call today and receive our complimentary emergency birthday kit. Inside you'll find 1 fork, 1 candle, 1 party hat, and a tiny legal document informing the cake that it has absolutely no constitutional right to flee the premises. Warning: Pizzaverse runaway birthday cake. Insurance is not responsible for cakes that develop consciousness. Join the circus. Cross interstate lines, or begin posting motivational videos on TikTok. Coverage unavailable in households where somebody ordered fruitcake. Because frankly, if the fruitcake runs away, let it go. Pizzaverse runaway birthday cake insurance. Because birthdays are stressful enough without dessert making a break for the damn border.
Zelda's birthday, the day the cake fought back. It was supposed to be a normal birthday. Of course, nobody told Zelda that. The morning began peacefully enough. Birds were chirping. The sun was shining. Somewhere in the distance, somebody was already arguing over how much frosting belonged on a cupcake. Then Zelda walked into the kitchen and stopped. On the table sat the biggest birthday cake she had ever seen. 3 layers, pink frosting, sprinkles, candles. Enough sugar to legally qualify as construction material. Zelda stared at it. The cake stared back. Zelda blinked. The cake blinked. Zelda slowly pointed at it. Did that cake just look at me? The cake suddenly yelled. "Don't cut me!" Zelda screamed. Everybody screamed. One balloon popped. A dog ran out of the room, and somebody in the hallway shouted, "I knew we should have bought cupcakes." The birthday cake jumped off the table and started running through the house on tiny frosting-covered legs. Zelda took off after it. "Get back here! You're my birthday cake!" The cake screamed, "I have dreams!" Zelda chased it through the living room, around the couch, under the table, past 3 confused party guests, and straight through a giant pile of birthday presents. Wrapping paper went flying everywhere. One gift landed on somebody's head. The cake climbed onto a chair and announced, "I demand negotiations." Zelda crossed her arms. "Fine." The cake pointed dramatically toward the candles on its head. "I want immunity." From what? Being eaten. Zelda thought about it. "No." The cake gasped. "You're cold-blooded." "Listen, pal, I've been waiting all year for this." The cake began backing away. Zelda stepped closer. The cake backed up again. Then suddenly, whoosh! The cake slipped on a party hat and flew straight into the air. It spun once, twice, 3 times, and landed perfectly back on the birthday table. Everybody froze. The candles were still lit. Not one sprinkle had moved. Zelda slowly smiled. The cake sighed. "Fine." Everyone gathered around. They began singing, "Happy birthday to you." The cake muttered, "This feels threatening." Zelda laughed. She closed her eyes and made her birthday wish. Then she blew out the candles. The room erupted in cheers. Confetti exploded. Balloons bounced everywhere. And somehow, somewhere, a disco ball dropped from the ceiling, even though nobody remembered installing one. The cake looked at Zelda. "So, what did you wish for?" Zelda smiled. "If I tell you, it won't come true." The cake nodded. "Fair enough." Zelda picked up the knife. The cake screamed, "Wait, wait, wait! We can talk about this!" Too late. Everybody got a slice, and it was delicious. Even the cake had to admit it. And from that day forward, Zelda's birthday became legendary. Not because of the presents, not because of the balloons, not even because of the runaway cake. But because Zelda proved something very important. You only get one birthday a year, so you might as well make it completely ridiculous. Happy birthday, Zelda. May your year be filled with laughter, surprises, great adventures, good people, and absolutely no cakes trying to escape the kitchen. The end. The cake will return in. Zelda 2: Revenge of the Cupcakes. Happy birthday, Zelda. From Bambi Palermo and the Pizzaverse.